Hey everyone, today's topic of discussion is balance. The question I'm going to give my thoughts on is, does gameplay need to be balanced, and is a balanced game more enjoyable to play? In my personal opinion, the answer to that question is yes, and yet occasionally it can be no, and I'll explain why I think that. I grew up playing chess tournaments and have always enjoyed being competitive in games. While far from the best player in the world, in my high school days I was a strong player and frequently scored high results in the tournaments I played in. In chess, both sides of the board are exactly the same. It's perfectly balanced. The only unfair advantage is that white goes first, and in a tournament setting, there are steps to ensure that this is also balanced, as players have the opportunity to start with both the white and black pieces. Now in chess, it's easy to have a balanced game, and most of the time the stronger player will win based on their knowledge of the game, studied strategies, and better decision making. Chess is balanced while also being complex and generally rewards the player who has a greater understanding of the game. Most TCGs strive to be balanced, but it is much harder to create a balanced TCG. Why is that so? Firstly, there's still the same small problem chess has, and that is the player who goes first has a slight advantage, and so to counter this, many card games place a small hindrance on the starting player or a slight leg up to the player going second. Currently in my game, the player going first does not draw a card on their first turn, as an effort to help counteract this imbalance. You could argue that if opponents were to take turns going first, the game would be balanced, and you wouldn't need to make any adjustments. It is still something I may think of changing in the future, or maybe I will come up with a different solution. Secondly, in chess you have a small number of pieces with unique traits. You have the king, the queen, the rook, the knight, the bishop, and the pawn, making a grand total of 6 unique pieces. In a TCG there can be hundreds of unique cards, and it can be difficult as the game creator to manage them in a way that is dynamic and interesting, creating cards that offer different strategies while maintaining balance. Being mindful not to create a card so overpowered that everyone feels forced to include it in their decks. This is why cards often get banned from play or nerfed to be less powerful. I'm not a huge fan of bans, but at the same time it is hard to make adjustments to a card that is already in someone's collection. Modern games often have a modern format so that overpowered cards from the past cycle out and can no longer be used in competitive scenarios. I do wonder what cards will stand out as being too strong, if any cards do, after my game is released. On to the third point. In chess, even when I versed a much stronger player, I always knew that I still had a chance to win. It would be really tough to beat a stronger opponent, but I had a chance. You want this in a game as it encourages you to learn the game more thoroughly and to develop your own skills. What you don't want is the stronger player losing when they have played really well. Basically, if you lose the game, it should be because you made some mistakes when you played your cards, or your deck building could have been improved, or the opponent played a strong game and executed their plan with a well-crafted deck to defeat you. The best games to play go back and forth where you feel reasonably in control of the actions you are making. It's important that the stronger player wins most of the time, but the underdog should still have a chance to win that encourages them to grow, learn, and refine their skills and deck building ability. In a TCG, you build a deck out of your own card collection, so it should be possible even with a deck that's not perfectly optimized for you to win. The nature of deck building is that you could create a deck that surprises your opponent. You might not play the strongest card, but you might play a card your opponent isn't expecting. So to answer the discussion question, I think a game works best when it is balanced and feels fair to both parties playing the game. However, there can be moments when the unexpected happens and the less skilled opponent or the opponent with an inferior deck wins, due to amazing play, the draw of a card, or mistakes on their opponent's side. But this should be a rarer event. I think having cards that are overpowered or that do really random things are not fun to play against. For example, if your opponent draws a card that, whenever it's played, basically wins the game for that player, it would be really annoying to lose to it. And if you were to start running it in your decks and you won every time you drew it, you wouldn't get much satisfaction from your victories. One way that I've tried to balance my game is by having a set limit on how many cards of each rarity can be included in a deck. You can only include 3 of any common, 2 of any rare, and 1 of any golden card in the decks you create. Therefore, I can design a golden card to be objectively more powerful than a common card. But if you run it in a deck, you wouldn't draw into it as much as you would a common card that you had 3 copies of, so it would be hard to consistently rely on that card to win games. If we break it down, you could draw a common card 3 times more often than a golden card. It would be a reasonable assumption, therefore, to think that you could make a more consistent and therefore possibly a stronger deck with common cards due to the frequency at which you draw the cards. Having players weigh up these options adds strategy to the game and helps to make the game exciting and interesting. Another way I've tried to balance my game is by thinking of things with the mindset of scissors, paper, rock. What do I mean by that? Well, as you know, rock is strong against scissors but weak against paper. Each has a strength and a weakness. They are strong in some circumstances and they can be countered in others. Pokemon has this idea strongly embedded into its cards. A fire-type Pokemon, for example, is strong against grass but weak against water. It means that you have to be really thoughtful when you play your Charizard. Even though Charizard is one of the strongest Pokemon, it may not be the right time to play it if a water Pokemon is staring you down. These choices are what make a game interesting and add depth and strategy. In my game, if I create a card that is a powerful flying dragon, I also think about if there is a card that counters that dragon. We need to remember what balance is. Think of a seesaw. If you have a really heavy object on one side, you need another heavy object on the other side. So whenever I create a card, I think about how it is balanced compared to the other cards I have already made. And does there need to be a counter for it, just like in scissors, paper, rock? As you can tell, I really enjoy discussing the subject of balancing games, so if you have any thoughts or questions, why not leave them in the comment section below and we can chat about it. I hope you are all doing well, thank you for your continued support, and I will see you next time.